At 10:34 local time, the East China Sea, 200 nautical miles northeast of the Taiwan Strait, is doing what it does on clear November mornings, producing a sky of the specific transparent blue that makes aircraft visible at distances that aircraft prefer not to be visible at, and a sea surface of the specific flat calm that makes radar returns clean and unambiguous and removes the weather excuses that maritime operations sometimes use to explain why something was not where it was supposed to be. Visibility is unlimited. The horizon is a razor line. Everything above it is accountable. Everything below it is the USS Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group's operational problem, and the USS Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group is managing its operational problems with the systematic professionalism of an organization that has been doing this in this part of the Pacific for decades and has opinions about every piece of airspace within 300 nautical miles. USS Carl Vinson, hull number CVN-70, an upgraded Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, is conducting flight operations on an easterly heading into a 12-knot wind, the minimum required for the current launch cycle. The cyclic has been running since 7 o'clock. The Air Boss has produced aircraft with the industrial rhythm that carrier aviation produces when conditions are favorable, which they are this morning, and the strike group's air picture is managed by an E-2D Advanced Hawkeye that has been established at 22,000 feet on its station, bearing northeast since 8:15, and that has been painting the airspace over the East China Sea with the comprehensive attention of a system that was built to know what is in the air and to share that knowledge with everyone in the formation simultaneously. At 10:34, what was in the air to the northwest changed. 2 contacts. Large. Fast for what they were, which was not very fast by the standards of the formation's own aircraft, but was exactly as fast as the contacts were designed to travel, which was fast enough. The E-2D classified them within 12 seconds of acquisition. H-6K Badger, derivative strategic bombers, Chinese People's Liberation Army Air Force, departing a heading consistent with a base in the eastern coastal region, inbound on a bearing that the Hawkeye's track resolved within 40 seconds, as placing both aircraft on a closing course toward the Carrier Strike Group's operating area, the H-6K. This requires a moment of honest history before the operational picture develops further, because the H-6K is a platform whose pedigree is longer than its designation suggests, and the length of that pedigree is itself operationally relevant. The Xi'an H-6 is China's license-produced derivative of the Soviet Tupolev Tu-16 Badger strategic bomber, which first flew in 1952. 1952 is the year that a different U.S. president was elected and that the Korean War was still active, and that the phrase digital avionics would have been science fiction to everyone involved in the Tu-16's design. The H-6K is a significantly modernized variant. New engines, new avionics, new weapons, a genuine update to the airframe that addresses many of the limitations of the original design. It carries the YJ-12 anti-ship missile, which is a supersonic sea-skimming missile that NATO analysts do not dismiss. It has genuine operational capability that the 7th Fleet takes seriously. What the H-6K is not is the kind of low observable platform that the East China Sea on a clear November morning with unlimited visibility and a fully operational E-2D overhead is designed to challenge. It is in the specific electromagnetic environment of the current tactical picture, radiating on 3 separate systems: its navigation radar, its terrain following radar in standby mode, and its data link transponder, with the specific confidence of an aircraft that is not operating in an emissions control posture because its mission does not require it to be, which is a mission design choice that the E-2D's collection suite noted, with the same interest it applies to all choices that produce useful data. The two H-6Ks had a J-16 escort, 4 of them in a loose formation approximately 12 nautical miles ahead of and flanking the bombers. The J-16S were familiar. The strike group had collected against this specific escort configuration in previous encounters, and the J-16S emission profile was in the library at Primary Data Quality from the P-8A collection event that the channel's audience may remember from an earlier engagement over the South China Sea. The J-16S were running their AESA radars in active mode, which the E-2DS collection confirmed with the passive precision of a system that does not need to illuminate anything to know what frequency everything else is using. In the carrier's Combat Direction Center, the strike group commander was looking at the picture with the attention of a flag officer who has been in this part of the Pacific long enough to have seen this specific operational concept before. The H-6K plus J-16 escort formation was a documented PLA Air Force presence operation methodology, a pattern that the 7th Fleet Intelligence Digest had been tracking across 17 previous incidents over the past 3 years, with documented variations in approach bearing, formation geometry, closest point of approach, and communication behavior. The formation approaching at 1034 was consistent with the pattern's parameters in every observable dimension. This was, in the 7th Fleet's operational vocabulary, a known contact type executing a known behavior in a known geographic area. What was not known was what was flying with them, 63 nautical miles behind and 11,000 feet above. At 10:31, 3 minutes before the E-2D classified the H-6Ks, a single F-35C Lightning II from Fighter Attack Squadron 147 had been launched from USS Carl Vinson's Catapult II. The launch had not been announced on any frequency that the PLA Air Force's collection assets in the area monitored. The F-35C does not announce itself. This is, in a meaningful operational sense, the point. The aircraft climbed on a vector that placed it northeast of the H-6K formation's approach, bearing at an altitude from which its sensor suite could observe the formation's approach without being observed by the formation's own sensor suite, which is a geometric and electromagnetic capability that is either deeply unfair or a remarkable achievement of engineering depending on which side of it you are on. The F-35C's AN/APG-81A ESA radar was in passive mode. The aircraft's electro-optical targeting system was tracking the lead H-6K from 63 nautical miles. The aircraft's electronic warfare suite, the AN/ALQ-239, distributed aperture system, a passive collection system that covers the full sphere around the aircraft, was receiving electromagnetic emissions from the H-6K formation, from the 4 J-16 escorts, and from the ground-based radar systems on the Chinese coast that were providing over-the-horizon tracking data to the formation's command and control network. All of it passive, all of it invisible, all of it being recorded and transmitted via the F-35C's data link to the carrier's Combat Direction Center in real time, updating the strike group's common tactical picture with a sensor view that the formation being observed had no reason to suspect existed. The H-6K carries a radar warning receiver. The J-16 carries radar warning receivers. Between them, the formation had sensors designed to detect the electromagnetic emissions of approaching aircraft. None of those sensors detected anything in the northeast sector at 1034 because the F-35C at 63 nautical miles in passive mode produces electromagnetic emissions that the radar warning receivers in this formation, at this range, in this configuration, were not acquiring. The formation was flying toward a carrier strike group and was being observed by an aircraft they had not found. Here is what the formation was producing for that observation. The H-6K's YJ-12 missile integration system, the radar and data link architecture that the bomber uses to acquire, track, and target surface vessels for the YJ-12's engagement, was in a configuration mode that the F-35C's distributed aperture system had not previously collected at this specific aspect angle and this specific range. The H-6K approaches anti-ship targeting from a specific azimuth relative to its own heading, and the targeting system's configuration varies with that azimuth in ways that produce different emission characteristics at different approach aspects. The F-35C was northeast of the formation. The formation was approaching from the northwest. The aspect angle between the F-35C's collection aperture and the H-6K's targeting system emitters was producing a view that the previous J-15 escort collection events from the south and southeast had not produced. The APG-81 is passive, but the DAS is collecting the YJ-12 integration system's emission from this aspect, the F-35C's pilot reported via encrypted data link to the Combat Direction Center. I have a frequency and pulse pattern on the targeting radar in its current configuration. This is a different look than previous collections. The intelligence officer in the Combat Direction Center pulled up the H-6KYJ-12 integration systems collection file. The file had entries from 3 previous encounters, all from southern or southeastern aspects. The current collection was from the northeast. The frequency pattern was the same baseline frequency as previous entries. The pulse structure was different, a different scan pattern, consistent with a targeting system that configures itself differently when the approach azimuth to the target is northeast rather than south. This was an operational emission configuration that the collection file had been missing. Is the targeting system in active engagement mode? The intelligence officer asked via the data link. Negative. It's in acquisition mode. Searching, not locked. No fire control solution being developed? A brief pause. But the acquisition mode emission at this aspect is a new data point. I'm logging everything. The formation reached its closest point of approach to the carrier strike group at 10:52, nearest H-6K, 81 nautical miles from the carrier's current position. The YJ-12's maximum range is approximately 400 kilometers, approximately 216 nautical miles, which means the H-6K at 81 nautical miles was within its own engagement envelope. It had not developed a fire control solution. The acquisition mode radar was searching, not locked. The formation was conducting a presence operation, demonstrating that it could approach this close, could observe this carrier, could exist in this airspace without crossing the threshold that would require a response beyond the F-35C's observation and the strike group's documentation. This is the specific operational concept, not an engagement, a demonstration, a carefully calibrated presence that produces political and propaganda value while remaining below the threshold of hostile action, and that produces intelligence value for the side conducting it. Imagery of the carrier, radar returns from the formation's surface search systems, communication intercepts from the carrier's radar emissions. The H-6K crew was collecting. They were collecting with confidence because the formation was alone in this airspace from their perspective, and alone formations conduct their collection without the defensive posture that observed formations maintain. The F-35C was 63 nautical miles northeast and 11,000 feet above, watching them collect and collecting everything they produced in the process. Now, the vulnerability window that the strike group's watch section was managing with the specific care of people who understand that an H-6K at 81 nautical miles with an acquisition mode targeting radar is a situation that warrants monitoring even when it does not warrant immediate response. USS Carl Vinson's current flight operations cycle required the carrier to maintain its easterly upwind heading for flight operations. The cyclic had been running since 7 o'clock, and the current launch sequence had aircraft in the air that needed to be recovered on schedule. Deviating from the upwind heading, the course change that would move the carrier's bow away from the H-6K formation's approach bearing and open the range geometry, would interrupt the recovery cycle and require the aircraft currently airborne to either divert their recovery timeline or recover at a different point in the cyclic. This is not catastrophic. It is operationally inconvenient in the way that interrupting a carrier recovery cycle is always operationally inconvenient, which is to say, manageable, but with consequences that the air boss and the strike group commander both prefer to avoid when managing around the consequences is an available option. The management option was maintain the recovery cycle on the current heading for 11 more minutes, at which point the cyclic's current recovery sequence would be complete, and execute a course change that opened the geometry at a moment of the strike group's choosing rather than a moment forced by the formation's approach. 11 minutes, 81 nautical miles, acquisition mode radar, F-35C overhead, full defensive posture on the formation's approach bearing. The tactical action officer had the SM-2 battery designated. The CIWS had tracking solutions on both H-6Ks. The Aegis combat system had calculated engagement timelines from multiple intercept options. None of them were being executed because none of them were required, and requiring a response was the formation's objective, and the formation was not achieving it. The air boss completed the recovery at 11:01. The strike group commander ordered a course change at 11:03, 23 degrees to port, opening the H-6K formations bearing to 109 degrees off the bow. By 11:07, the formation's closest point of approach geometry had stabilized at 87 nautical miles in opening. The H-6Ks turned northwest at 11:11. The J-16 escort followed at 11:12. The F-35C maintained its position northeast for an additional 6 minutes, collecting the emission profile of the formation on its outbound leg. The outbound configuration, the targeting system's behavior when the formation turns away from the target, was a data point that previous collection events had not captured from this specific aspect. The F-35C's DAS was recording. At 11:17, with the formation at 112 nautical miles and the collection data at sufficient quality, the pilot descended and turned southeast toward the carrier's recovery point. He was aboard at 11:31. The collection package was transmitted to the carrier's intelligence shop at 11:22 via data link before the aircraft recovered. The intelligence officer was already reading it when the F-35C caught the wire. The YJ-12 integration system emission at northeast aspect is a different scan pattern from all previous entries, the intelligence officer told the strike group commander at 11:45 during the post-event brief. The previous collection was all from southern aspects. This aspect shows a wider scan arc and a slower pulse rate, which is consistent with the system searching a wider angular sector when the approach azimuth is from that direction. A pause. We now have the system's scan behavior at 2 different azimuth configurations. The targeting geometry for this specific approach pattern is now characterized. What does that mean for engagement planning? It means the jamming parameters for the YJ-12's integration radar can be configured specifically for the northeast approach azimuth, rather than using the southern aspect parameters as a general approximation. If an H-6K approaches from the northeast in a future engagement, the electronic warfare response is now calibrated for that specific configuration rather than a generalized one. The intelligence officer looked at his notes. The collection also confirmed the J-16 AESA emission profile from this range and formation geometry, cross-correlated with the previous South China Sea collection, now with a different escort spacing and heading. The library update covers both the H-6K targeting system and the J-16 escort formation behavior at this approach aspect. The strike group commander noted this. He noted it in the way that a flag officer notes things that matter for the next encounter rather than this one, which is the manner in which operational intelligence is received when it is functioning correctly. The collection from today's encounter would not change what had just happened. It would change how the next similar encounter was managed, which is the direction that intelligence is supposed to move things. Now, the money shock that this encounter produces when you run the numbers from the correct perspective. The H-6K formation had approached to conduct a presence operation. The presence operation had succeeded in its primary objective. The formation had reached 81 nautical miles from the carrier, had demonstrated that PLA Air Force strategic bombers could approach this close, and had collected radar and imagery data on the carrier strike group's configuration. Beijing's media apparatus would have access to this narrative by afternoon. The footage from the H-6K's nose camera, the carrier strike group visible on the formation's radar display, the presence demonstrated, the imperialist warship in Chinese-claimed waters, observed and recorded, would be available for whatever editorial purpose the PLA Air Force's media team decided served the narrative. The H-6K formation had also spent approximately 2 hours of flight time for 2 aircraft, plus 4 J-16 escort sorties at operational cost rates for the PLA Air Force. The operational cost of this sortie at assessed PLA Air Force unit costs was approximately $400,000 across all 6 aircraft. The F-35C had been airborne for 1 hour and 57 minutes. A single F-35C sortie at carrier aviation operational cost rates is approximately $45,000. For $45,000, the United States Navy had been present for every minute of the H-6K formation's approach, had collected the YJ-12 targeting system's northeast aspect scan configuration, had cross-correlated the J-16 AESA escort behavior at a new formation geometry, and had done all of this without the formation being aware that the observation was occurring. The collection package was in the PACOM intelligence system before the H-6K formation had cleared the area. The H-6K formation had spent $400,000 collecting data that the F-35C had already collected better, from a closer position, with higher fidelity, while being invisible. And the F-35C's collection of the H-6K formation's targeting system configuration had produced the specific data point that would make the next time this scenario played out slightly more favorable for the defending side's jamming parameters. Chinese state media, by 1500 local time, had a segment. The PLA Air Force's Strategic Bomber Force had conducted a successful patrol in the Western Pacific, demonstrating China's sovereign right to operate in its own maritime airspace and the operational readiness of its strategic aviation forces. The footage showed H-6K bombers in flight, genuinely impressive imagery. The bombers' size and the YJ-12 missiles visible under their wings, the Pacific Ocean below. A commentator described the operation as a warning to forces that conduct provocative intrusions in China's maritime domain. The narrative was clear. The production values were professional. The mission had achieved its objectives. The mission had also spent the last hour and 57 minutes producing a northeast aspect YJ-12 integration system scan profile, AJ-16A ESA emission confirmation at a new formation geometry, and an outbound leg configuration characterization for the benefit of an F-35C crew that the H-6K mission planners had not placed in their threat assessment. USS Carl Vinson's deck log for the period read 10:34 to 11:31, H-6K formation, 2 aircraft, J-16 escort, 4 aircraft, CPA 81 nautical miles, 10:52, F-35C observation sortie, passive collection throughout, recovery 11:31, course change 11:03, no weapons employment, no hostile action, no damage. Collection package transmitted, PACOM 11:22. The intelligence annex was 6 pages. Page 5 was the YJ-12 northeast aspect characterization. Page 6 was the recommendation for jamming parameter updates flagged urgent to the electronic warfare community before the afternoon brief. The H-6K is 73 years of pedigree, updated with modern weapons and avionics, carrying a genuine capability that the 7th Fleet plans around. It approaches a carrier strike group from outside the recovery cycle's interrupt threshold, demonstrating presence, collecting data, and returning to base with footage. The F-35C is the aircraft that the H-6K's radar warning receivers did not detect, carrying the collection suite that the H-6K's designers did not plan for, producing the jamming update that the H-6K's targeting system will encounter on the next approach. The demonstration happened. The collection happened. Both sides flew home with data. Only one side knew the other was there. Bye for now.